Welcome, everyone. Let's dive into India's manufacturing scene today, especially looking at how it stacks up against China and Vietnam.
I'm excited. This is such a hot topic. What's catching your attention first?
Well, it all kicked off with a bold statement from Rahul Gandhi in the US. He basically said that India sort of gave up production to China and now has zero jobs. And that really lit up the room, especially on Reddit.
Oh, definitely. People weren't just agreeing, they were firing back with some harsh critiques about his party's long rule and how they mishandled things in the past, right?
Exactly. The discussion became this unfiltered mix where folks were laying out like, who were you even if you were in charge for so long? And then there's the twist. They questioned why he'd even make such a claim in the US versus at home. They were wondering if it was about influencing an overseas vote or just rhetoric.
It's clear that the context here is as much about politics as it is about manufacturing. What about the government's response? Like the production-linked incentive, PLI scheme?
The PLI scheme. That came up a lot too. On one hand, it's presented as a major push to bring manufacturing back into India, but critics say it's, more like a boon for a handful of big companies, basically profiteering rather than really boosting broad employment.
Yeah.
It's a classic case of policy intentions versus impacts.
And then there's that nagging debate over automation. Some argue that India's huge workforce might give them an edge if automation isn't fully applicable in every sector.
Right. It's like even though India has this massive labor pool, technological adoption might sometimes level the playing field, especially in sectors where automation isn't a complete solution, because not every process can be automated cost-effectively.
That's a great point. But then again, isn't it true that the numbers out there are pretty startling? India reportedly has less than 3% of the global share in labor-intensive manufacturing.
Yes, and when you compare, Vietnam is nearly double that share, and China is off the charts, like 10 times the share of India in certain areas. It really puts India's challenge into sharp perspective.
It's a hard pill to swallow, especially given India's huge population. What do you make of the historical performance discussions in those threads?
There was a lot of back and forth around how previous governments managed the manufacturing sector. Some folks argued the pace had been better under earlier administrations, while others maintained that ups and downs were inevitable, no matter who was in charge.
Right.
You know, it really depends on the broader global and domestic conditions.
Absolutely, and that ties in with another musing, tariffs. They sparked a huge debate around protectionism versus free trade, like with the N95 mask scenario and the auto industry.
Yes, tariffs surely have a double-edged effect. For instance, India imposes high tariffs to protect domestic industries, but at the same time, it means that consumers sometimes end up paying more for cars or electronics.
Exactly.
It's not all black and white.
I wonder, though, don't tariffs sometimes end up stifling innovation? People say that protecting local firms excessively can lead to complacency.
That's a fair critique. While tariffs can encourage domestic production and safeguard critical sectors, they might also, shield underperforming companies from necessary competition. It's a balancing act for sure.
Speaking of balance, what about the global comparisons? The numbers really tell a story.
They do. Even though India holds a massive population advantage, its labor-intensive manufacturing global share remains underwhelming compared to both China and Vietnam. And some users pointed out that this discrepancy shows deep structural challenges. It's a stark reality check.
And there's also an intriguing angle where some argued that, as automation tech advances, India's large workforce might start to turn into an advantage in niches where full automation is either too expensive or not feasible.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's like, on one hand, you have a huge pool of workers, and on the other, you face intense competition from countries that have already modernized their production lines. The outcome would heavily depend on which sectors adapt faster.
That brings us to trade dynamics. How do you see policies like the U.S. tariffs and even Trump's previous actions influencing these shifts?
They add layers of complexity. Western companies shifting some of their production from China to India, for example, might be trying to dodge U.S. tariffs. But then, regulatory hurdles and long-standing trade practices in India create new challenges. It's all interconnected.
And there's also the issue of foreign companies having to partner with local conglomerates like Tata or Reliance, which some labeled as a form of crony capitalism.
Exactly. That forces them to operate under conditions that might not be entirely fair in a free market, potentially raising costs for consumers and hindering overall competition. It's a contentious point.
To add to the mix, some users brought up that these tariffs are basically like an extra consumption tax on top of GST. That cumulative cost has got to sting.
Oh, definitely. When you stack tariffs on goods that are already taxed, it creates a sort of double whammy. Businesses then struggle with complex pricing and, well, consumers end up feeling the pinch at the checkout. A real head-scratcher for the economy.
I also found it interesting when they mentioned companies like Lenovo moving parts of production from China to India. It shows that these trade tensions are actually causing real moves in the global supply chain.
Yes, but then again, that kind of shift brings its own challenges for India, like upgrading infrastructure, streamlining regulations, and ensuring quality production. It's like trying to start a new race mid-marathon. Exciting, but tough.
Exactly.
The hurdles are significant.
And all this feeds back into the huge debate on whether India's Make in India initiative is effective at all. What's your take on that?
Well, Make in India remains ambitious and symbolically important, but the results seem mixed. Critics point out that while there's been an increase in exports and some higher value manufacturing, overall, manufacturing's contribution to GDP hasn't really shot up as expected. It's like the progress isn't evenly spread.
I can see that. But I'd challenge respectfully the notion that it's a total failure. It might just be in a phase of transition, given global economic uncertainties.
True, global forces do play a role, but the data from various discussions suggests that policy missteps have certainly contributed to the lag. It's a multifaceted issue. No single factor explains it all.
Absolutely, and looking at all these nuances, the mix of domestic policies, global trade tensions, and technical trends, it really shows there's no silver bullet here.
Exactly. It's about finding the right policy shifts that can leverage India's strengths, like its huge labor pool, while also encouraging innovation and fair competition.
Right.
A delicate balancing act indeed.
And then there's that fascinating discussion about companies leaving China altogether. Some call it a flood, like a mass exodus. Do you reckon India could actually be the destination for these companies?
Potentially, yes. But India would need to overcome a lot. Upgrading infrastructure, tackling regulatory bottlenecks, and making sure local industries can compete on a global scale. It's a huge opportunity, but one that comes with significant challenges. The promise comes with its fair share of risks.
And in the end, it's a question of whether global economic pressures can spur domestic reforms, or if the inertia in existing policies will hold India back.
Absolutely. With trade policies, tariffs, and the competitive pressures from both China and Vietnam, India's manufacturing story is just beginning to unfold. It's a dynamic and evolving landscape.
So here's a final thought for our listeners. With all these debates, from tariff strategies, automated trends, and policy effectiveness, what do you think is the single biggest lever for change in India's manufacturing over the next decade?
That's the million-dollar question. Thanks for joining this engaging ride through such a complex topic. Until next time, keep questioning and exploring these economic twists and turns.